Hello, Oasis. Hey, how's it going? Good, good. I am so excited to see you guys again. It's been a month, and man, summertime is just a time when things look a little bit different. And over the past few weeks, I've been reflecting on some of the summer jobs that I had growing up. And I don't know if you ever had a job in the summer that was not the first choice, but the job you did so you could have fun when you went back to school the next year, or so that you could just pay the bills or just keep doing fun things with your community. I had one such job, and I thought it was a good idea at the beginning, and it really was not. I worked as a lifeguard for a couple of summers. I am still CPR certified, so if anybody needs help, I will help you at 901. But I worked as a lifeguard, and I thought it would be this really, really great idea. But let me remind you, I am from Kansas, and I know that it gets hot here in South Dakota, but y'all have not experienced the wrath of July in Kansas. Like, you walk outside, and you're just immediately wet, like from sweating, and you're like, did it rain? And you're like, no, this is humidity. And I worked at this pool. I was gonna be a lifeguard, and I just thought it would be this time where I could sit back and relax and get a tan and hang out with my friends, and it was not that type of summer. You see, I lived next to a glorified water park, so we had a wave pool, we had 5 different water slides, and so everybody in the town wanted to come to this pool. So we had tons of people there every single day, and we needed 25 lifeguards to technically be open, but we only had 19 that even worked for us. So in order for us to make sure people got days off, we usually only had 15 or 16 lifeguards working each day. And so let me reframe this story. I'm working as a lifeguard in the middle of July in a heat wave, 6 days a week, for 8 to 10 hours a day, just baking in the sun. And I have parents complaining to me that they walked all the way up to the top of the slide with like their 2-year-old kid, and they're like, why can't my kid go down the slide by themselves? And I'm like, you didn't see the 5 signs that had like the height requirement? I have kids that are just running everywhere, and I'm like, dude, you need to walk. It is a swimming pool. Like, we all know these rules that we're supposed to do at swimming pools, and week after week, like, the same people would come back and do the same exact thing that I told them not to do the week before. And I noticed this transformation start to happen in the people that I worked with. Because the first week we're pretty nice about it. Like, we'll go talk to a family and redirect them and be really, really polite. But as we sit there in the sun, we start to get a little rude and not so kind, and it's really hard to be loving. And this is when we just start pulling out that whistle, and we don't even tell people or look people in the eye, but we just start blowing that thing. Like, we see a kid running all the way yonder, we'll just sit there and blow the whistle and hope that the kid knows that they're doing something wrong. Like, we lost the energy to do the right thing and to be kind and loving, and we just started blowing our whistle. And so that was my summer. That's how I spent them. And over the past couple of weeks, I've been reflecting on how I see God, and I realize sometimes in life, I see God like the lifeguard who is annoyed, rather than the person that created me out of love. I grew up in the church. I went to every single youth camp, youth conference, college conference you could think of. Like, I knew who God was my entire life. I knew all the things that I should be doing as a Christian. And sometimes it felt like a to-do list that I had to check off day in and day out. And when I would fail and when I would mess up, I often believed that God was sitting high and lofty, chilling in the shade on his lifeguard stand, just blowing his whistle at me. I had this image that God was more annoyed by my failure and upset by it, rather than a God who loved me and desired more for me. But this isn't who our God is. Our God is triune, and he is a community of self-giving love. It's actually the lyrics of the song that we just sang, that we said, praise the Father and the Son and the Spirit. They are 3 in 1, and they are united together by a shared love for one another. And it's sacrificial and it's self-giving. The Father loves the Son, and the Son loves the Spirit, and the Spirit loves the Father. And it's out of this community that these 3 persons are united as one. Our God is a community, and it's out of this desire to share love that God has created the world. It's out of this beautiful desire for his creation to experience love that God has created you and me and every single person that we will see. God created us so that he could share his image and his love with every person that we will ever see. And we have to start here tonight. We have to get this clear. God is not a lifeguard, but our God is a loving community who seeks to share his image that he has planted in us to the entire world. But we know that sin changes things, because sin starts to cover up this image. It starts to mar what God has planted in us, this beautiful image. And over time, we become separated from this loving community of God, and we start to look more and more like the desires of our flesh. We start to crave what God has called not good. And we struggle because God has planted this beautiful image of him in our community, yet it's covered by the choices that we make. Yet God still doesn't pull out a whistle, he pulls out his plan. We see that in the Old Testament, God, he chose this nation of Israel. And he said, this is how we're gonna uncover this image again. This is how we're gonna spread this love and this goodness to the world. I'm gonna choose a community of people. And so he chooses Israel. And he says, look, I'm gonna make a promise with you that if you follow me and that if you keep my commands, I'm gonna lead you out of a wilderness. I'm gonna settle you in this land where you can be assigned to every other nation, that by the way you would live, that you would treat your neighbor, by the way you even breathe and just exist, that nations are gonna look at you and see who I am and that I am the one and true God. And so God, he redeems Israel from their slavery and leads them into this promised land, and he sets kings over them in order that the king might lead the nation of Israel into what is good, into what God has called good and pleasing. And God has given Israel this law so that they would know how to do this. And it's by following this law that God would restore the community of Israel to look like him. It wasn't about a list of rules to be kept. It wasn't about completing everything 100%. It was about living in such a way that God could uncover the image that he has planted inside each and every one of us. But it gets even more beautiful than this, because it wasn't just about you. It wasn't just about me. It was about what God could do in communities that were wholly and completely devoted to him. It was about what God could do in turning the everyday, ordinary spaces into sanctuaries where he was worshiped, where he was seen. It was what God could do in the home, in the kitchen, what God could do at the grocery store, what God could do at the market. It was what God could do in all these ordinary places in order for his glory and his renown and his image to be known. And the way to that was obedience. Obedience is the path of transformation. There is none other. And it's hard to hear that, right? Like, that sits deeply with us. Because when we hear the word obedience, we're often confronted with the ways that maybe we haven't followed God the way we should. Yet tonight, I hope you hear that there's an invitation for you, that God has invited us into beauty, that out of his love, he has continually invited to take one more step forward. Obedience is the path of renewing this image within us. And so these kings, they were called to lead Israel, and it's a series that we're kicking off this summer. And within 300 years, Israel will experience 39 kings, and 31 of them are not gonna be great. They're really, really gonna miss the mark. 8 of these kings are gonna be really good, yet all of these kings at some point, they're gonna fail. All of these kings are gonna make a mistake. But all of these kings are mirrors into our own life of how we can keep taking one more step closer and closer to who God is. And so if you have your Bible, go ahead and flip over to 1 Samuel 9. And the people of God have been asking for a king, and I want you, as you turn there, to think of what qualification would you want in a king? Like, his responsibility is to lead the nation of Israel into obedience. And so I think if I was looking at the resume of all the candidates that are trying to be king, I would probably think first, like, man, I would want someone who follows God. right? I'd probably want someone that comes to church, that reads their Bible, that spends time listening to God and being with him. I want someone who is devoted to following God. I might also look like a king does have like some military strategy and responsibilities like that. So maybe some leadership experience, maybe some conflict resolution experience. I think those are the qualifications that we think of with a king. But in verse 1 and 2, we see that the first king doesn't have these qualities. We read that there is a Benjamite, a man of standing whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah of Benjamin. Kish had a son named Saul, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. Within these two verses, the author of Samuel is introducing us to the first king. And we learn three things about this king. The first one is that Saul's name can be translated to mean asked for. Israel had been asking God for a king, and the man that God has chosen, his name literally means, this is the guy that you asked for. The second thing is that Saul has a family history, and so all of those names that are hard to pronounce. Basically, Saul's dad was a warrior. His dad's name was Kish. Kish was known for winning a bunch of battles, and then he gained a bunch of wealth. So Saul comes from this family that is known for being strong, known for being mighty, and known for having some wealth. And the last thing we learn is that Saul is attractive and he is tall. And when I think of a king, and when I think of what I look for in a king, I don't think I think of any of those things to be on the list. Yet, what the author of Samuel is telling us, he's pulling out like this yellow flag. He's saying, look, none of these things are bad, but none of these things are also super great. The author of Samuel is inviting us to see that Saul is known for looking like a king. And this leads us to ask the question of, what is Saul's character like? Can he do more than just look like a king? Can he be a king? Can he be someone that will lead Israel in a path of obedience and in a path of transformation? And as chapter 9 continues, we catch this window into what Saul is like and what God's plan is. Saul's family has lost their donkeys. I don't know how you lose your donkeys, but Saul's family has lost their donkeys. And so Saul is now sent with his servant to go find these donkeys. And they're searching for a really, really long time. And they still can't find their donkeys. And so his servant has this idea. They're in this place where Samuel, a prophet, is living. Samuel is this guy who is known for hearing from God, being able to deliver messages. And so Saul's servant is like, okay, let's go to Samuel, because maybe if we talk to him, God will speak to Samuel and tell us where these donkeys are. And so we pick up the story back in verse 14. It says, they went up to the town, and as they were entering it, there was Samuel coming toward them on his way up to the high place. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. When Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, this is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. This is the moment in which we see that God is beginning a new promise with Saul. God is communicating to Saul that he is going to be the king of Israel. Saul will have responsibility in leading God's people. Yet Saul's job won't just be leading them in worship. God has also promised to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. The Philistines was this group of people that lived nearby, and they were the greatest military power. They were the greatest threat to Israel. Yet God has promised Saul that Saul will be delivering Israel from the Philistines. And from this moment forward, Saul gets to choose how he will lead Israel. The choice is up to him. God has said, these are the things that you are responsible for, and you now have the job of executing them. Saul gets to choose if he will be a good and faithful servant. And over the next couple chapters, we see that Saul's doing a pretty good job. Like, God is with him, God is speaking to him, he is winning battles, he is gaining favor, and suddenly this man that looked like he didn't have a lot to offer in character is beginning to not just look like a king, but be a king. He is leading Israel into victory, but this is pretty short-lived. And if we flip over to chapter 13, we see the story start to change. We see that Saul gets backed into a corner. He has been winning some battles, and so he decides that he's going to send a bunch of his men back home. So he's hiding out in this place called Gilgal with 3,000 men. He was told by Samuel to wait there for 7 days. Samuel was about to come and to offer a sacrifice of worship to God, and this would be a way of asking God to rescue Israel. It would be a way of Israel showing God that they trust him to deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. And so Saul has been told to not do anything until the sacrifice has been offered, and so they're waiting here. But if you're in chapter 13, verse 5, read what the Philistines have. It says that the Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. When the Israelites saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard-pressed, they hid in caves and thickets among the rocks, and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time sent by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal. And Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me up the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up the burnt offering. So Israel is severely outnumbered. It's day 7, and Samuel hasn't shown up. Saul is being asked to wait for Samuel. But Saul's men had started to scatter. Like, they already don't have a lot of men, and now Saul's men are starting to flee in fear of their life. And Saul, as king, this is not good for him, because this shows that he might not be a great leader. He might not be a guy who is a good king. And as these people leave, it's like one more pang into his insecure heart that he might not be good enough. And Saul can't take it anymore. And so he offers up this burnt offering. He takes matters into his own hands. And Saul, as a king, wasn't allowed to offer up these offerings. It was something that only a priest could do. God had called Israel to be holy and set apart, and these offerings were holy and set apart, and only the priest could offer them up to the Lord. Yet Saul knew this, and he chose to disobey God because he was insecure. And yet Samuel confronts Saul. He says, "Saul, why are you doing this?" But Saul refuses to admit that he's done anything wrong. Saul actually chooses to justify his decision based on his circumstance. He says, "Samuel, you were kind of late. You didn't really show up when I wanted you to. And so I took matters into my own hands." And it's here that we're reminded of those yellow flags again. We're reminded that maybe Saul and his character isn't everything that we've hoped for in a king. Maybe he's just someone that looks like a king. And we keep asking this question, so what is Saul going to do now? How is he going to respond? How is he going to keep leading his people? We see that Saul, he actually, in his disobedience, that God has consequences for it. His kingdom won't last forever. We read that his family won't be able to take the throne. God has begun looking for a man with a heart that is holy and completely devoted to him, and it will not be Saul. And when I hear that, my heart aches a little bit. Our disobedience sometimes has consequences. Yet in that, the question is, will Saul reorient his life and continue to seek who God is? Will he continue to be faithful? Will he continue to get back up and worship God? Not only has Saul lost 2,400 men by the end of this battle, but he has also lost the chance for his family to reign on the throne. Saul has the choice of being a good and faithful servant, yet in this moment he has disobeyed. And as the story continues, we have to flip to chapter 15, and it's this hope that maybe things could be different. Maybe Saul gets it right this time. In chapter 15, Saul is instructed to go into another battle, and God has told him to destroy everything. The Israelites, they are fighting the Amalekites, and God has said, you can't take any of their people, you can't take any of their possessions, you can't take anything. It all needs to be destroyed. Yet in chapter 15, verse 9, read what Saul and his army do. It says, "But Saul and the army spared Agag, And the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and the lambs, everything that was good, these they were unwilling to destroy completely. But everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. Saul directly disobeyed God. Saul and his army saw things that could gain them more wealth. They saw things that could add to what they already had. They saw the best of like all the meats that they could have, like this full course buffet of like bacon, and they're like, man, that looks amazing. And so they took it for themselves even though they weren't supposed to. And yet we see that God isn't blind to our mistakes. And so God sends Samuel, the prophet. And Samuel confronts Saul in verse 20, and he says, Saul, what are you doing? And Saul says, but I did obey the Lord. I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. And what Saul said here is concerning, because Saul is using worship as an excuse to be disobedient. He's using worship as an excuse to take things that he was told to not take. But he's like, man, maybe if I take a couple of these lambs that look really good and we offer one of them up to God, I can still keep the rest of these lambs and it's okay. Saul starts making decisions based on what he can have and using worship as a way to justify it. And it's right here where Samuel steps in to correct Saul and his theology. Samuel says, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. And once again, we're brought with words from Samuel that carry a weight. But Samuel here is opening our eyes to see the point of the law. The point of the law wasn't about offering the sacrifice, it was about the heart. The point of the law wasn't about filling out a checklist, it was about, does your heart desire what God desires? Samuel is inviting us to see that God is not impressed with our worship if our heart isn't right with him. God is not impressed with Saul's worship because Saul's heart is not right with God. Saul has disobeyed again. Saul has lied, he has cheated, he has stolen, and he has justified himself. He is unwilling to listen to the words of Samuel. We have seen over and over again that Saul's character has fallen short. And we need to balance this out here, because guess what? God loves when we worship him. He loves it when we spend time with him. He loves it when we're here. He loves it when we're singing. He loves it when we serve. But God's more concerned about our heart. Like, what good is it if I'm here and I'm singing my heart out and I got my hands in the air and then I go out and I just like rob Walmart? Like, what good is that? What good is it if we're devoted to God in this phase, and then we leave and we are directly disobedient to him? Because obedience to God, it doesn't start with a to-do list, it starts in our heart. And this is what God is concerned about, because Saul doesn't have it in his heart. He's trying to hide it. He's using worship as a way to hide from God. And God tonight is inviting us to worship him through obedience by first looking at our heart. True obedience flows from love. True obedience begins when we understand that our God himself is love. He has chosen to create us out of love. And when we rest in that, everything changes. Like, when you know that you are loved by God, everything changes. When you know that out of his love for you, that he has made a plan for you, that he has designed a way for you to follow him, everything changes, because you no longer want to desire what God has called not good. You want to desire what he has called good, because you know that he loves you and that he cares for you. True obedience flows from a heart of love. And we've seen this love, we've experienced. It's the love of Jesus as he died on the cross for us, as he paid the price that we couldn't pay. It's this same love that has set us free from sin. It's the same love that has sent us the Spirit of God to empower us to be with him, to spend time with him. Everything changes when we know that we're loved by God. Obedience changes when we know that we're loved by God because it's the natural response for what God has done for us. And as I was writing the sermon over the past few weeks, I have been wrestling with language and with words. Because I know that some of us in here tonight, we're gonna hear and see God's invitation to beauty. We're gonna cling to this image that God can fully transform a community into revealing his image to others. And others of us, we're gonna leave tonight and we're gonna feel like maybe we didn't measure up. And over this past week, I saw this photo. It's by one of my favorite painters. His name is Scott Erickson. And it's a painting of a guy face planting while ice skating, which I think is kind of funny. But have you ever seen a middle-aged man ice skate for the first time? Or can you just imagine it? This middle-aged man trying to hold the wall, and there's a bunch of kids playing middle school hockey, just going around him, and he gets freaked out, and he's probably gonna fall on his face. I saw this image this week, and it was kind of what I felt like a lot when I talk about obedience. Because when I'm asked to obey, sometimes I get really nervous and afraid that I'm gonna fall. I'm afraid of messing up. I'm afraid of not being enough. And I'm afraid that maybe if I only pray for 3 minutes tomorrow morning, that God might not love me as much as if I prayed for 5 minutes tomorrow morning. Those are some of the thoughts that go through my head. And this painting just reminded me that we're gonna fail. It's how it is. There are 39 kings of Israel within 300 years, and all of them failed. But do you know what separates the bad kings from the good kings? The good kings got back up. The good kings tried to ice skate again. The good kings heard the wisdom of their friends and of their community. They repented, they asked God for his forgiveness, and they got back up and they kept walking. And if you show this image again, I want to point out one thing to you. One of the reasons why I love this image is that there's this gold circle on it. Whenever you see a gold circle like this in art, it's a sign of God's presence. So this middle-aged man, as he's trying to ice skate, and he just falls flat on his face, the presence of God is with him. It never left him. The presence of God is there to help him get back up. The presence of God is gonna be there when he falls again. And the presence of God is gonna help him get back up. And this week, I just saw this image and I just saw the beauty of what it's like to follow Jesus. Obedience is the path, yet we do fail. But God's presence has never left us. Because he loves us, he has sent us his Spirit to be with us as we journey. And I believe that when we hear the word obedience, we can understand and already see the places where God is inviting us to more. And I'm asking you tonight, will you see that as an opportunity to participate in God's beauty? Don't listen to the voice of shame. Don't listen to this voice of guilt that the enemy may try to hinder you with, but hold and cling to God's beauty because he's doing something here in you and in our community. He's been working. What does it look like for you this week to take one simple step to participate in what God is making beautiful?